Hello, how are you? Welcome to your favorite storytelling channel. Let's get started. Once upon a time, there was a young nurse named Abigail who worked at a small hospital in the United States. She had just been hired, but everyone already loved her. Do you know why? Because Abigail was someone who truly cared about others. She treated each patient as if they were a friend or family member. If a patient was sad, she would try to cheer them up. If someone needed help, she would be there before they were called. But Abigail's way of being also had a difficult side. She was not only a dedicated nurse, she was also a very sensitive person. When someone suffered in the hospital, it was as if she felt their pain too. As much as she loved her job, it was impossible not to carry a little piece of each patient's suffering with her. This often meant that she would go home tired, but always determined to continue helping. And it was on an ordinary night, while Abigail was on duty, that something happened that would change her life forever. In the middle of the night, 2 ambulances arrived urgently at the hospital. Inside them were a young man and a young woman, both badly injured after a car accident. Abigail, as always, rushed to help the doctors, trying to do everything she could to save their lives. Unfortunately, the young man did not survive his injuries and died. The young woman, named Naomi, survived, but was in a coma. Abigail felt a pang in her heart when she saw the situation of that young woman. She was so young, so beautiful, but she seemed to be trapped in a deep sleep from which no one knew if she would wake up. Naomi stayed in the hospital, and Abigail began to take care of her every day. Little by little, the nurse began to feel very connected to that young woman who seemed like a sleeping beauty. Even without hearing or speaking, Naomi earned a special place in Abigail's heart, and she did her best to give the best care possible. Little did she know that soon, a surprising discovery would shake up not only the hospital routine, but also the entire life of Naomi and her own family. This was just the beginning of a story full of mysteries, emotions, and twists. And it all started with Abigail, the nurse with a giant heart who was about to discover something that no one would ever imagine. One night, while Abigail was working her shift at the hospital, everything seemed calm. But suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of ambulances arriving at high speed. She knew that something very serious had happened. As soon as the emergency room doors opened, the paramedics rushed in, bringing 2 young men who had been in a car accident. Both were badly injured and unconscious. Abigail wasted no time. Together with the doctors, she rushed to help, doing everything she could to try to save those lives. The young man was in a critical condition. Despite the efforts of the entire team, he did not survive. That broke Abigail's heart, but she knew that there was still another life to care for. Young Naomi, only 18 years old. Naomi had suffered a very strong blow to the head, which the doctors called a traumatic brain injury. She was in a coma, a state of deep sleep from which no one knew if she would ever wake up. Abigail looked at that young girl and thought about how her life had changed in a matter of minutes. Even though she didn't know her, Abigail felt an enormous responsibility for Naomi. She knew that while the young girl was in that delicate state, she would need all the attention and care possible. Abigail decided that she would do her best to help Naomi fight for her life, even if it was a silent battle, with no guarantee of victory. And so, on that night that began like any other, Abigail's and Naomi's lives crossed in an unexpected way, beginning a story that no one in the hospital would ever forget. As the days went by, Abigail began to feel a great affection for Naomi. Even though they had never exchanged a single word, it seemed that there was a special bond between them. Naomi remained in a coma, in a deep sleep that had lasted 90 days. To many, she seemed unreachable, but to Abigail, Naomi was more than just a patient. She was someone who needed attention, care, and most of all, love. Every day, Naomi's parents came to the hospital. They sat by their daughter's bedside, held her hand, and talked to her as if she could hear. They told her the news of the day, talked about the things she liked, and even made plans for when she woke up. For Abigail, this was something magical to see. It was a love so strong and pure that she could barely hold back the tears as she watched. Seeing this love touched Abigail even more, because she knew what it was like to live without it. She had grown up in an orphanage, with no parents to tell stories to, no hugs or words of comfort. So every gesture of affection from Naomi's parents seemed to touch a special place in Abigail's heart. She thought to herself, how amazing it is to see people so devoted to their daughter, even when she can't respond. I never had that, but I can help give it to Naomi while she's here. This feeling only made Abigail work even harder to care for the young girl, as if she were caring for someone in her own family. And so, day after day, Abigail devoted herself to Naomi, believing that somehow she would feel all the love and affection she received, even in this silent state. The nurse waited, with her heart full of hope, that Naomi would one day wake up to see how much she was loved. On a day that seemed like any other, Abigail entered Naomi's room to perform routine care. She was used to seeing the young woman lying in bed, quiet, as if she were in a deep sleep. But while she was changing Naomi's clothes, something caught her attention. Her belly seemed to be bigger than normal. Abigail was intrigued. This was not something common for a patient in a coma. Concerned, Abigail called the doctor who was on duty. He also thought it was strange and decided to run tests to understand what was happening. That's when the surprise came. Naomi was pregnant. Abigail was so shocked that, for a few moments, she could barely process what she had just heard. How was this possible? Naomi had been in a coma for months. The situation was so unusual that the hospital had to call the police to investigate. The news spread quickly, and soon everyone was talking about Naomi's case. The doctors, who rarely come across something so out of the ordinary, began to analyze every detail. DNA tests were performed to find out who the baby's father was. Abigail followed everything closely, her heart heavy, trying to understand how this could have happened. When the results came back, there was another surprise. The baby was Naomi's boyfriend, the young man who had died in the accident. The doctors were amazed. For them, it was a true miracle. How had the pregnancy withstood so many difficulties? The accident, the surgeries, the coma. It was something no one could explain. And while the hospital adjusted to the new reality, Abigail knew that this discovery would only be the beginning of an even more complicated and emotional story. After months in a deep sleep, something incredible happened. Naomi opened her eyes. It was a moment full of emotion and surprise in the hospital. Abigail was nearby and could hardly believe what she was seeing. It was as if, after so long, the young woman was finally returning to the world around her. At first, Naomi was very weak. Her movements were slow, and she couldn't speak properly. The doctors explained that this was normal after so much time in a coma. With patience and care, she began to improve a little each day. It was as if she was learning to live again, one step at a time. But then came the news that changed everything. Naomi discovered she was pregnant. When she saw her belly and understood what it meant, her reaction was very different from what anyone expected. Instead of joy, Naomi felt a deep sadness. Abigail tried to support her, but it was difficult for Naomi to deal with it all. She was filled with painful memories of the accident that left her in that state. Knowing that she had lost her father and her boyfriend that very day only added to the pain. And now, carrying a baby that was the result of such a traumatic past made her feel a mix of rejection and anger. "I didn't ask for this," Naomi said one day, with tears in her eyes. "Why did this happen to me?" For Abigail, hearing those words was heartbreaking. She knew that Naomi was carrying more than a baby. She was carrying an enormous emotional burden, full of hurt and loss. Still, Abigail and the doctors were determined to help her, both physically and emotionally. Naomi's recovery would not only be a matter of healing her body, but also of calming her soul, bringing back the strength she never knew she had. And little by little, this new chapter in her life began to unfold. The big day arrived. Naomi's baby was born. Everyone in the hospital was tense, but also full of anticipation. It was an important and delicate moment, because the entire pregnancy had been full of challenges. The baby was born healthy, which was almost a miracle, considering everything Naomi had been through. But instead of joy, the birth brought a wave of sadness. Naomi, who was still struggling to deal with her trauma, refused to see the baby. She didn't want to hold it in her arms or find out if it was a boy or a girl. For her, the child was a vivid reminder of everything she had lost: her father, her boyfriend, and the life she had known before the accident. With tears in her eyes, Naomi made a difficult decision. She asked for the baby to be given up for adoption. Abigail was in the room when it happened. She saw Naomi's face as she made the request, and it was impossible not to see the pain behind her choice. It wasn't anger or indifference. It was something much deeper, as if Naomi was trying to protect herself from further pain. Still, it was difficult for Abigail to fully understand what Naomi was feeling. She knew that everyone deals with grief differently, but watching a mother walk away from her baby weighed heavily on her heart. Abigail wished she could say something that would change Naomi's mind, but she knew that at that moment, the young woman needed to follow the path she thought was best. With the baby now in the hospital's care, Abigail looked at him and wondered, what kind of world awaits this child? Will he find the love he deserves? She had no answers, but she promised herself that she would do everything in her power to take care of this little being, even if only for a short time. In the meantime, Naomi tried to move on. Despite her decision, the birth of the baby left a mark on her life, something that she would carry with her forever, even without realizing it. And Abigail, as always, was there, watching closely and hoping that, somehow, time would help heal so many open wounds. 20 years had passed since the difficult days that changed Naomi's life. Now, she was a mature woman, married and the mother of 2 young children. Her life seemed peaceful. She had a loving family and owned a beautiful flower shop, a place full of colors and perfumes that she helped to take care of herself. Working with flowers brought peace to Naomi's heart, especially because nature always seemed to whisper words of comfort to her. But despite everything she had achieved, there was a weight that she carried deep in her chest. Some memories simply would not leave her alone. Sometimes she found herself thinking about the accident that changed her life, the father she lost, the boyfriend who did not survive, and, most of all, the baby she gave up for adoption. It was as if this part of the past had never gone away. When her children played around the house, Naomi imagined what that child she never knew would be like. Would he be okay? Would he have been happy? And most of all, where would he be now? These questions began to take over her thoughts, especially during the silent nights when the weight of longing and doubt seemed stronger. One day, while tending to the flowers in her shop, Naomi found herself staring at a cactus that was in a special corner. She had always loved cacti because, despite their prickly nature, they represented strength and resilience. It was at that moment that something inside her awakened. She realized it was time to face what she had always tried to avoid. She could no longer live with so many unanswered questions. That night, Naomi summoned up the courage to tell her husband her decision. "I need to look for the child I gave up for adoption," she said, her eyes filled with emotion. Her husband, who had always been understanding, held her hand and replied, "If it will bring peace to your heart, you have my full support." With the encouragement of her family, Naomi began to plan how she would find the son she had given up so many years ago. She knew it would be an emotional and challenging journey, but for the first time, she was ready to face her past. After all, perhaps finding that child would be the key to finally healing the wounds she had carried for so long. Naomi felt her heart beat faster as she approached the gate of the orphanage. It was a simple place, but full of stories. She didn't know exactly what to expect when she entered, but she was determined to find out more about the child she had left behind so many years ago. With hesitant but firm steps, she crossed the threshold. Soon, a familiar voice called out to her, "Naomi." She turned and saw a woman who seemed to have something special in her eyes, a mixture of surprise and affection. It was Abigail. For a moment, Naomi was confused. "Do you know me?" she asked, trying to remember that woman. Abigail smiled gently and answered, "Yes, Naomi. I'm Abigail, the nurse who took care of you all that time in the hospital." Naomi was silent for a few moments, letting the words sink in. The thought of meeting someone who had been there for her during one of the most difficult times in her life thrilled her. But there was something else in Abigail's eyes, as if she knew things that Naomi was there to find out. The two sat down to talk, and Abigail began to tell her about the baby. Gently, she revealed something that Naomi had not expected to hear. "Your son was never adopted." Naomi's eyes widened, unable to say anything at the moment. Abigail continued, "He grew up here, in the orphanage, and he left when he turned 18. I've kept in touch with him ever since. He's a very special person." Naomi felt a mix of emotions, surprise, relief, and anxiety. Do you know where he is?" she asked, breathless. Abigail nodded, but explained carefully, "I know where he is, but he doesn't know you've come looking for him. I need his permission so you can meet. I don't want to force anything." Naomi understood. Even though she was desperate to see her son, she knew Abigail was right. She didn't want to invade his life without his approval. "Please tell him I'm here and that I want to meet him," Naomi said, tears in her eyes. As she left the orphanage, Naomi felt something different in her heart. Hope. For the first time in years, she had a chance to fill the void she had been carrying. And now, all she could do was hope that her son would be willing to open the door to this long-awaited reunion. Naomi was back to her routine at the flower shop, but now her mind was always divided between flower arrangements and memories of what Abigail had told her. The thought of her son being out there, living his own life, was both exciting and frightening. Was he okay? Did he want to meet her? These questions echoed in her mind like a constant refrain. One day, while arranging cacti in a special corner of the store, Naomi noticed a young couple coming through the door. They seemed happy, but there was something about the way they looked at the plants that caught her attention. The young woman picked up a small cactus and said with a smile, "I love cacti. They are so strong. Even in the most difficult conditions, they can survive. They teach us that life can be hard, but it is possible to endure." Those words stuck in Naomi's head. They seemed familiar, as if they had come from a special place. The young man who accompanied the young woman looked around silently, but there was something in his manner that intrigued Naomi. He seemed familiar. The two of them returned to the store a few times, and Naomi began to notice little details. The young man always bought roses, as if they were important to him. He looked at each plant carefully, but seemed to avoid direct contact with Naomi. The more she saw him, the more a strange feeling grew in her chest. Could it be possible? One day, when Abigail came to visit Naomi at the flower shop, Naomi couldn't contain her curiosity. She told her about the couple who frequented the shop, and how the boy made her feel something different. Abigail listened intently and, after a pause, smiled slightly. "Naomi, that boy is Dominic," she said, her voice gentle. Naomi felt her heart race. "Dominic? My son?" she asked, almost in disbelief. Abigail nodded. "He knew where you were, but he was always afraid to come near you. He thought you wouldn't want to see him, because of what happened in the past." So he just comes here, as if that would be enough to be near you, without scaring you. Abigail's words broke Naomi's heart and, at the same time, filled her with hope. Dominic had been so close to her all the time, and she didn't even know it. Now, more than ever, Naomi knew she had to do something. But how could she break this barrier? How could she show Dominic that she wanted to meet him, that he was welcome in her life? In that moment, Naomi realized that the reunion with her son was closer than ever. She just needed to find the right way to tell him that, no matter what the past, he was always loved. And so, she began to plan how to turn these discoveries into a new beginning. The day of the reunion finally arrived. Naomi was nervous, her heart beating so fast it felt like it wanted to burst out of her chest. She held the hands of Abigail and Martha, Dominic's close friend, as they walked to his house. Each step seemed to take an eternity, and Naomi's head was full of questions. Will he accept me? Will he want to see me? What will I say? When they reached the door, Naomi felt butterflies in her stomach. Martha rang the doorbell, and the sound seemed to echo louder than usual. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there he was, Dominic. The boy stood still when he saw Naomi. His eyes showed surprise, fear, and, at the same time, an emotion that was difficult to describe. Naomi was also paralyzed for a moment, but she couldn't hold back her tears. Without thinking, he took a step forward and said, "My son." His voice was choked, and before he could say anything else, Dominic whispered, almost without realizing it, "Mother." It was enough to break any barrier between them. At that moment, Naomi hugged him with all the strength she had. Dominic hesitated for a second, but then returned the hug. They were both crying, feeling a mix of relief and emotion. It was as if years of distance and uncertainty were being erased in that simple gesture. "I'm sorry about everything," Naomi said through tears. "I never stopped thinking about you, not for a day." Dominic shook his head, also moved. "You did what you thought was best, Mom. I understand. And even far away, I always wanted to know who you were." They sat down and started talking. Hours passed without them noticing. Dominic talked about his life in the orphanage, his difficulties, and the moments when Abigail was by his side, like a protector. Naomi, in turn, spoke about the difficult choices she had to make and how much she carried the weight of having left her son. As the sun began to set, Naomi realized it was time to introduce Dominic to the rest of her family. She took him home, where her husband and 2 children welcomed him with open arms. Dominic seemed thrilled to meet his younger brothers. It was as if he had suddenly gained a whole new family. From that day on, Dominic truly became part of Naomi's life. It wasn't easy for either of them to leave the past behind, but together, they were ready to create new memories. Naomi, who previously lived with an emptiness in her heart, now felt that she was finally complete. And Dominic, who always wanted to meet his mother, finally found the place he was always looking for. Next to her, Naomi sat in the garden of her flower shop, looking at the sky that was beginning to fill with stars. Beside him, Dominic played with his younger brothers, while laughter echoed throughout the yard. It was a simple scene, but full of meaning. For the first time in many years, Naomi felt her heart at peace. She knew that the past could never be erased. The pain, the losses, the difficult choices, all of this was part of his story. But now she understood that the past didn't need to define her. She had a new chance, a second chance to write a different future, and she was determined to do it in the best way possible. Dominic, with his calm manner and shy smile, was a constant reminder of how life can be full of surprises. Naomi looked at him and thought about how that boy, who one day she had to let go, had transformed into a strong, kind, and courageous young man. It was as if he carried a light that illuminated not only his own path, but hers as well. She decided that from now on she would do everything in her power to be the mother Dominic deserved. It didn't matter if they had wasted 20 years, because now they had the present and the future to build together. Every conversation, every moment shared, every hug was a new piece that united the two in a unique and special way. Naomi learned that second chances don't erase scars from the past, but they can turn wounds into strength. As she hugged Dominic, she not only found the son she thought she had lost, but also a part of herself that had been sleeping. With Dominic by her side, Naomi discovered that even in the midst of life's storms, it is always possible to bloom again, like the flowers she so lovingly tended to in her shop. And so, with a renewed heart, she moved on, ready to live this new stage with all the joy and love that life could offer.